Welcome back to the Alexander Schmidt podcast 041, episode 041. This is a conversation with Mr. Wesley Schantz, our newly named Contemplative Conversations, where we engage in a concentration, a shared center of attention, where we try to find the fine nuances and details in something that perhaps we all as a culture have seen in the broad strokes. And well, welcome back, Wes.
Hey, good morning. Glad to be back.
Morning. Good morning. Yeah, and that's something that I should address. A couple things. I'm sorry to the listeners that I haven't recorded much this week, but I'm building new curriculum for my ninth graders. I did an Oedipus unit this time around, and I'm building a lot of creative energy out of me, as well as I'm completing Dante's Paradiso with my sophomores. And one funny coincidence or piece of serendipity or providence or synchronicity, depending on how scientific or religious you happen to be, is that Dante's Paradiso, the entire comedy, takes place during Easter weekend, starting on Good Friday and ending on Easter. So he comes back to life on the same day that Jesus returns into the world, suggesting some idea that once you have the right ideal in mind, you can embody it in the world, which makes the world better, which is a beautiful idea. But we are finishing our foray into the Divine Comedy the same week as Easter. We have spring break this week, and like my last lecture will be the Tuesday after Easter on Dante's Paradiso. And believe it or not, I did not plan that at all. I intended to be done much earlier. Yeah, isn't that interesting? One thing I'd also like to do is make a shout out to Rise and Grind. My good friend Perry Worth from Milwaukee has several episodes on there now, and he's a very successful entrepreneurial computer scientist and jiu-jitsu practitioner. He was the first black belt ever awarded a black belt under the black belt we both studied under, Professor John Friedland, who I believe is a 3-stripe black belt now. And I'm very proud of both him and Perry. But Perry's also a very good person, which I love. But something that he focuses on in his podcast, since he has so many good friends, so many family members, so many business ventures and martial arts ventures going on, is how to efficiently use one's time and how to conduct oneself at different times of the day. And in fact, his show is at 8:15 a.m. on Saturdays, which, what a god-awful time to be awake from people. But I thought about that, and, well, you and I are both early risers, aren't we?
Yeah.
Wes, yeah. And in fact, today we're talking at about 8:30 a.m., and we spoke last night, and we knew that we would be able to we knew we could trust each other to be up, and not only be up, but be rather functional at this time, because we both get up actually much earlier than this to work on our creative endeavors, right? So what have you been spending your morning doing? And in fact, I know you didn't just do this morning, because we have lived in the same house before. That's something I guess we should tell the listeners. We were summer roommates at one time during St. John's. And I would always wake up in the morning. You were always up before me at that time. You would still have your glasses on, and you would usually be writing, and I would usually probably try and say something ironic or disparaging, because I was embarrassed you were up earlier and using your time better than I was. But I have to say that I probably acted that way because I was impressed and didn't want to be.
Oh gosh, yeah. Well,
yeah. Go on.
It's tough, when you first get up in the morning, it's always like the most tempting thing is just to stay in bed and go back to sleep for a while. That doesn't stop being the case, at least not usually. But then if you do swing out of bed, and it helps if you have cats. So I've got 3 cats now, and they like my face and purr on me and wake me up and stuff. So then I'm up, and then I go and I always try to write a little bit first thing. Lately, I've been mostly working on translation that I was supposed to work on a long time ago, and it just kind of fell by the wayside, but I'm finally working on it. It's a translation of an Uruguayan author, Pedro Figari, who is not well known outside of Uruguay. Not really that well known in Uruguay, but he's a painter. Primarily, he's known for his art. But he's also got this incredible body of stories, essays. It's very interesting. Anyway, so working on that, little by little. Each morning I do a little of that. I write a little bit of stuff for my blog and for this and that. But this morning I was working on a poem about stars actually, and I quote. I don't directly quote, but I definitely refer to or try to echo what Dante does at the end of each of the canticles. He has the word star, right? Stars.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I put that towards the end of the poem. I thought that would be kind of
So
neat.
just as my week ended with the stars of the Paradiso, so has your week begun with writing about the stars of the Paradiso at the beginning of your day on Sunday?
There you go.
Let's talk about death and rebirth, Good Friday and Easter Sunday. And, stars like the leaves of the trees are those things which die and are reborn every day too, right? Mm-hmm. And so that seems to be part of the message of what heaven is in Dante's Paradiso, that when you lose your ideal in life, perhaps because you have lost everything and the dominant structure in which you existed, which would have been Dante as politician in Florence, mm-hmm. that makes room sometimes, if you can survive the chaos of the ensuing day or night, for a new order or a new dawn, a new star to rise that can perhaps rise even higher than the one that you lost before.
Well, the thing is, like, the stars are always there. It's only from our point of view that they go away and come back, right? And so it's like Dante, he doesn't ever really lose the order because it's always there. It's like even his hell is incredibly orderly, even in the midst of some danger, right? And some elements of chaos, but they're all within. He's got this incredible, framework that he's working within. And as you described, it has to do with time. It has to do with the holy days. And so he's definitely caught by a safety net, of a deeper order than the political. He's caught in the cosmic order.
Right.
And he's
and
ultimately it's all going to be okay.
Something that comes out from the Empyrean, or when you get to the top of heaven, the 10th sphere, as it was, you go from circles to spheres. Things go from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional between hell and heaven. As if they go from more subjective to objective, or more imaginary to real, something like that. I would say the subjective to objective is the better distinction. Because hell is subjective for Dante,
yes,
though there is an objective element to it. It is objective or transcendent in that it can exist for all people, but the particular route by which you get there is yours alone, though you may be an exemplar, or you certainly will be an exemplar of some sin according to categorical type, just like many people before you, which is the point of Dante showing several examples of every single sin and exactly where it gets somebody in terms of their reputation, fame, and effect on the society around them. Essentially, they sow discord and dissolve that which gives them all the gifts which they enjoy in their lives. And Dante has to suffer that too, because he gets exiled, even though he finds himself, like Jesus, to be unjustly persecuted. And he wishes to consciously embody his suffering in a very similar way to that too. But I'm sorry, the second we get back on radio, I start losing my point again because I don't have anything to reference.
It's okay.
But yeah, you were saying about time. Sorry, just one thing about the Empyrean is that the Empyrean encircles not only all the heavens below it, but also the earth. And in the earth, Dante locates hell, which means that the Empyrean, which is alternatively defined as the mind of God, the mind of God encompasses all heaven and earth, and also hell. You mentioned that hell is ordered, and that it is ordered in a way much deeper than the social order. You might even say that there is something of a biological order there, in that being treacherous towards other humans or being untrustworthy is something we do not even breed for, right? In fact, as we've learned from the work of Jordan B. Peterson, is that we have the whites of our eyes, unlike gorillas, because we reference by looking at each other's eyes. And in fact, you have cultural norms arise because of that biological fact. Take off your sunglasses when you're talking to somebody. Look me in the eye when you shake my hand. It's like, these are not simply cultural constructions. They come about from what gives us our evolutionary advantage. And so the idea is that a structure was laid down within the world and within man that allowed for both good and evil, so that it could allow for that which is beyond good or evil, which is human free choice.
Yeah, yeah.
And what Dante offers is, he says, well, look, if you make these sorts of decisions, and hell is very much structured hierarchically with several circles and some sub pockets.
In fact, the pockets.
The eighth circle has 10 pockets in it, 10 bulges, as if they're like warts, right? Like outgrowths, that people who have gone against their own forms. Well, so that seems to be the idea, that if you learn discernment, which will free your will, you can consciously embody one of the constellations or exemplary lives which have been lived. And there have been so many exemplary lives, both from the Greco-Roman tradition, or excuse me, not both, but from the Greco-Roman tradition, the Hebrew tradition, and the Christian tradition Dante will draw heavily from, that you can then live a life worth living that shows the depth of your discernment and care for being, in a way that living a life of, say, Dantistic sin does not, simply because it makes you devolve away from the form in a Neoplatonic sort of way, that it makes your story less worthy of being immortal, and thus limits the scope of your being, because your being is your story if you consider what you are throughout the course of space and time during your life, that you exist within space-time, that you are an adapting and sort of evolving character within an adapting and sort of evolving environment or world.
Yeah, that's also like the kind of unfolding through time also includes this kind of repetition over time.
Yes, like music.
Yeah. So the idea that you can sort of see someone in the past, some ideal or some model, whatever, you can see that person, you can read their work and sort of consider that. You can then see, role models in your own life, peers or older people, mentors, whatever, people you either know or people that you hear about, whatever. So you have all these kinds of positive models out there to try to live up to. It seems very unfortunate then that, like, on the other hand, you have this kind of selfish desire to be really different too, so it's like, oh, I don't want to be like, anyone else. I'm unique. I'm totally my own person, right? And so that very thing, which, is passionate and which can drive you to do great things, can unfortunately also sort of like, lead you astray and sort of blind you to the larger patterns of which you're a part, and which
that's right, and actually keep you from becoming the unique thing that you're supposed to, by denying your capacity to transform yourself and the world around you, in insofar as you can make that which is potential into that which is actual, which is what we constantly seem to be doing as humans. In fact, that's one of the big Aristotelian questions. He says, is this tree potentially a desk, or is this plank of wood potentially a desk? And I thought that's very good, because it depends on how you use the word. You can say that the tree is potentially a desk, but there are several different stages still between it and it becoming a desk. And also, the power to transform does not exist within the tree to make a desk. It exists within man, which is the interesting thing about that. But the plank of wood is more potentially the desk, in that it can become a desk in one step. And so Aristotle contrasts this with a metaphor about who has more potential, a child or a general. And again, the words being used in different ways. The child has more potential life paths he might take and more potential to grow physically and intellectually because he has not covered as much ground. But the general has vastly more potential to act. He has almost infinite avenues of action available to him with an army underneath him, especially if he's successful in any particular moment. And so how we even look at these terms is very interesting. Sorry, losing my thought one more time, just because the things you say are so interesting. Oh yes, the passions. And so the thing about it is that if we fail to make appropriate distinctions and understand what is most human in us, which we might understand to be the transforming aspect of consciousness, how we explore something external or even internal, a thought or even a physical object, or even a person or a new game or a new subject. And in exploring it, we have to be courageous because it makes us feel nervous because we don't understand it very well and we lose our footing. But in exploring it, we start to understand it. And in understanding it, we start to enjoy it more, to like it, to see what makes sense in it. It seems to be making something that doesn't make sense gives us the greatest joy. And then we want to share it with other people when we have finally made sense of it, because then we know it. It's part of our known territory, part of our map. And then we want to share a piece of that map because we know it's useful. And so...
And we want to play. We want to let others in on the game, right?
Yes. Yes, because when others are in the game, when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, it's like, then you're playing a game.
Yeah.
And then that's a whole new thing to explore, and a whole new way to explore yourself, and a whole new way to explore your friends. Can you play this game? Are you any good at it? Will we end up in the same position in this game as we did in the last game we played? Or will you be better at this? And if you're better at this, what skill is it that you have? What attribute is it that enables you to be better? Did you work harder at this game? Do you have a background in this game? Do you have an innate capacity that makes you really good at this game? Like are we now playing basketball and you're taller than I am? And now, you have long arms, and does that give you a big rebounding advantage that makes sure that you always beat me,
And I mean, so thinking about just going back to the idea of the morning, right? Before we leave that sort of metaphor behind, it made me think, and I was kind of thinking about this too with respect to the individualizing versus the community or sort of traditional perspective. Nietzsche, right? Nietzsche says somewhere, I don't remember where now, maybe a few different places, he'll talk about his morning thoughts. When he wakes up in the morning, he has these beautiful thoughts, and then he sort of writes out all those paragraphs and sections and books, and by the end of the book he'll kind of come back to wondering, so what became of those morning thoughts, and he'll sort of muse on that as a way to sort of close the work. I can't remember now which book it is. Again, it could be more than one, but he's such an interesting case for me. He's sort of like, he seems to have been caught between, so am I a poet, or am I a philosopher? Am I a psychologist? What am I meant to be? What is my potential calling me towards? And he seems to have kind of foundered on the difficulty of fitting himself into a tradition which had sort of by that point seemed to have been played out. Dante's in it when it's really alive and still growing, and by the time Nietzsche comes along, the tradition seems to have grown sterile, and so he's sort of at a loss. What do I do?
Yeah, well, I would say it's more like Dante sees it all falling apart and sees its actual secular repercussions in the dismemberment of the Roman state into Florence and the papal state and the various regions that occupy the Italian peninsula at that time. So he's fighting as hard as he possibly can because it's still a fight. It strikes me that what you notice about Nietzsche is that he sees when he famously says God is dead and we'll never find enough water to wash off the blood from our hands.
Killed him.
He's like the person who is the divine sacrifice in a Dionysiac way, in that he's the one sitting on his knees, looking to the heavens with blood on his hands, thinking, "Oh God, what do we do now?" But speaking more to our situation, it's almost as if we've grown up with that crusted blood on our hands, and it has been a birthright of us. And so what I think our project has been as young educators who wish to transcend the mentality of the 60s that's perforated our culture. And I mean one of cultural disestablishment, one of not only disestablishing that which is bad in culture, like the apartheid or colonialism, but also all the good things as well. And so it's more our job as conscious individuals, as the highest representations of what a state can be, to think through these issues, these secular and these sacred issues, because we have access to the leisure time, the health, the resources, the communities necessary in order to understand the most difficult thoughts that have ever been thought in the best way they have ever been thought through. Because conditions are so set in our favor in order to do this. I mean, where I live, it never gets cold. It's it's wonderful. It's like a Greece. It's down here in San Diego or in Athens in that respect. Perhaps not as many philosophers, certainly as many sophists.
There's so many people. Like it's unreal how it's not just like the quality of access, but also the amount. Like you can reach so many people now with a great work. It's accessible to anyone at any time. They can get on there and read, pretty much anything they want. It's a sort of a matter of getting them to want to do it. That's the question. But yeah, I think just being that kind of role model is a big part of that, though. Having somebody that you look up to who says, "Hey, this is like worth reading. This is worth thinking about and talking about." Getting.
Well, that's so powerful, I think, because one thing I know that we had planned to talk about, and so we'll actually get to something on the list, which isn't that the wonderful thing about a good conversation, that you might have a list going in there being like, okay, maybe I won't feel the magic today. Maybe I'll need to, maybe we'll just need to talk about some of these calcified, interesting ideas we've been wanting to talk about. And then poof, we have an entire conversation and we haven't touched on any of it. I suppose it lets you know just how far attention can range and interest can range. And the Achaean gods are described as moving fast as thought, and the Phaeacian ships in the Odyssey are described as moving as fast as thought. And Dante up in heaven experiences his attention flashing back down to the earth 6,000 miles away, it's described as, which means that attention, like Hermes with his winged sandals, or the golden snitch from Harry Potter, is that which can cover the most range in terms of space or time. And in so doing can fill out your map of reality and being to a fuller extent so that you do not fall through it. But something interesting you were saying about embodying ideals is that Dante's conception of the Trinity, I believe, suggests exactly that idea, which is also paralleled by the fact that Dante goes into hell on Good Friday, just like Jesus did. Even within his own interpretation within the text, Jesus has done that and harrowed hell and taken the Hebrew patriarchs out. But he leads Rahab, the prostitute of Jericho, at the head.
Oh, cool.
Because she of course reminds him of his mother, of Mary, the person who might be perceived as fallen, who saves everybody. And that's based on the interpretation that Mary, in becoming pregnant with Jesus, would not have been portrayed, would not have been seen by her fellow women and men in the poor city she was from as a divine carrier of God. That is certainly not how anybody would have seen her.
Not the first conclusion you're bound to draw there, right?
No, not the first conclusion they would have drawn. And that's also a fairly common motif in Ovid's Metamorphoses and in the Greek the Greek myths, being impregnated by a god and the consequences of that. And often it means persecution in the world. And that certainly seems to have been what the case was in this story as well. And so, I
want to hear about
yes. So, yeah, thank you. These, I need, my mind needs to get strong enough to maintain these branches. But so Dante has the Trinity represented at the top of heaven as 3 circles of light, which he can see after he unblinds himself or enlightens himself by drinking a river of light with his eyes that then reveals itself as a divine circle of gold, like a crown or halo. And so these 3 circles are all different colors, and the father circle is described as being so similar to the sun circle that it is like a rainbow being reflected by another rainbow.
Oh, man.
We actually have some beautiful double rainbow videos and pictures, and I remember that famous triple rainbow one from a few years back where the guy is just so awestruck and taken with wonder that the whole world felt the need to make fun of him. He's like, whoa, look, it's a double rainbow. Wow. Well, and so and they're connected by the Holy Spirit, which draws them together like a living flame. And so, and in the sun circle, sun, S-O-N, there is an effigy of man vaguely inscribed. And so how I took that to mean was that the Father is the ideal in heaven, which the Son embodies on earth, and the Holy Spirit is the connection or relationship between them. And thus, insofar as one embodies one's ideal on the earth, one feels closer to God through one's relationship or the Holy Spirit, / one is closer to God, in that one is embodying more of the ideal, which is identified with God the Father in the world, which means that one is literally living a more exemplary life, which is more representative of the divine, which means more of the divine shines out, phanesthai, from one into the theater of one's environment, and thus can be perceived and imitated by other humans. And in fact, that is one of the things that makes us so special. And in fact, Peterson believes this is what gives us a capacity for language, that we have such a tremendous capacity for imitation. That's certainly how we learn all our games. We imitate first, learn, and be able to articulate the rules second.
Yeah, so the Trinity is presented usually in sort of dogmatic terms. It's a great mystery, right? And it's the thing. It's sort of like one of those things, sort of like the incarnation and the resurrection. It's these sort of tenets which you must, in order to be a good Christian, you must just take on faith. Like, don't try to understand it, because it's impossible for your intellect. It has to be through your faith that you get this thing, or the communion, right? The bread, right? That's the body of Christ. So there's all these sort of mysteries, and so it's, well, I think that you know, that it's still within your rights to sort of like interpret it poetically, and like you're saying, like sort of shine this light upon the thing. It doesn't remove the mystery of the faith. And in fact, it makes it into this sort of beautiful play of concepts. And if anything, that's something that would be, I don't know, in a way more difficult, more mysterious, right? Like, by what power are you able to do this thing? Like, because when I've read only a little bit of Paradiso, but I have read the very end, and it's an overwhelming experience to read that, because it's sort of like you can almost grasp it, but not quite, and it's just amazing that he's able to do that. And so yeah, I just like how you can have this paradox where it's both a great mystery and full of light at the same time.
Well, And that's exactly right. It's the great unknown, which is the dragon from which we get all our gold. It's the greatest mysteries that have the most gold, the most information in them. They are the highest contenders and thus teach you the most about the world and yourself. It's it's when you're truly struggling against something that you learn who you are and what you're capable of. The Jacob versus the angel idea here. The great mysteries are the great sharpening stones, I would say. The fact is they will never be exhausted. The fact is and this is why, throughout time, how one speaks about God has been difficult. So the original idea, there are three ways, traditionally speaking. The first way is through negation. God is not this. God is not that. The second way is through superlatives. God is the best of this. God is the perfect. God is, yeah, exactly. The perfect version of this. And the third way is by analogy, that how we use language to apply to us applies differently to God, but that's the best we have as a tool. So that's how we have to talk, which I think is a fantastic solution. But I think the idea is actually that the divine is language, and that's why you can't talk about the Tao or the divine. It is the capacity for consciousness, the transformative capacity in man that not only transforms him, but the environment around him, and which is constantly acting, which is why our culture, our hairstyles, our language is always changing. The tools with which even we use. I mean, I was reading a book by Ray Kurzweil recently where he was like, when does a piece of technology become an artifact? And it seems to be like 15 years after obsolescence, because it's like a typewriter. Is that a functional object, or is that like a cool set piece to have in your room? And, 3 or 4 hipsters might argue that it's functional, but it's like, no, not really. It's not functional in the same way that learning to wield a katana now is not a functional way to become a warrior. You can learn that, and that's very neat. But if somebody takes out a gun, you're going to be, you're not going to be as useful at that moment. That's not the state of modern warfare, is the idea. It is, you could still defend yourself. Especially against people who didn't have any sorts of weapons, and certainly against people who didn't know how to use katanas. But that's just not how we do the fighting these days.
It's mostly to look cool, as you said with the typewriter. Right? It's a sort of it's a cool thing. It's interesting, but it's no longer taken seriously for its original functional.
Right. There's not widespread agreement that that's going to be the weapon of war.
Right.
And in fact, that might be a really interesting question. What is the widespread agreement on what the weapon of war is? Because
it's words. It's words.
Okay, yeah, no, interesting. And so the warfare is whether we're going to accept that consciousness exists or not. It seems. He's going back to your comments about the structured organization of the Inferno and the entire Divine Comedy. It's when we collapse the distinctions in the world, or desire to destroy inequality through destroying our surplus, which is the only way to destroy inequality, because the moment there's a surplus, just like in the game Monopoly, some people are going to have more than others. Though we do know that the top 1% does change constantly throughout America. Families are always coming to prominence and losing it, as it were. And you actually have a 10% possibility of making it into that 1% at some point.
Oh, wow.
Which means you have a chance. And nobody's trying to keep you down. I'm sorry. Where was I going with that again?
Started out saying something about destroying inequality.
So right. When you destroy inequality, well, the conditions which make inequality possible are also the conditions which make a structured society possible. The fact of inequality comes about not because anybody is attempting to oppress any other person in a free market society anyway, but simply because that's how the society evolves, given that there are differing levels of competency and also differing, not only differing levels of competency, which you can see in literally every sort of work, especially say surgeons. What sort of surgeon do you want working on you? But also, what is the word I'm looking for here? So without an ability to go in a different direction and go further than one's peers, one has no access to the nuances that exist within this world. it flattens out the playing field, and without a way up, there's no way to access the incentive reward system. You just have the consummatory reward system, which is, eat some food and then it's done.
Yeah.
But the higher way of living, the Neoplatonic sort of way, or the Jungian way, you might say, the way where you try and transform yourself so that you become more like the ideal which you serve or pursue, is that it is precisely moving up those nuances of the sort of mental or spiritual pyramid in which we exist that gives us the greatest pleasure in life, and also enables us to live the best and most exemplary possible life, where we constantly are climbing or pushing the rock up like Sisyphus, or dragging our cross up to Golgotha's hill, or like Moses, or climbing the mountain, or like Zeus, or on the Mount Ida. We're always, when we say that nothing matters, or that everything is equal, or that necessary distinctions that we have made are simply arbitrary, we destroy, and even if that were all true, which it certainly is not, we destroy the capacity to live a good life of conscious struggle towards something good. Then we are all left like Achilles in his dark tent, like Dante in his dark wood, where it's like, well, if everything's good and bad and there's nothing different, and we're all just imperfect, or we're just as perfect as we can be, why should we do anything?
Yeah.
We're like the lotus eaters in the Odyssey.
I mean, it's like you leave open the possibility that things are not as you believe them to be, but you don't start from the proposition that nothing has any meaning. Because if you start there, you never progress anywhere.
And why would you?
If you somehow go beyond good and evil, as Nietzsche would say, and you arrive at something like that, well, good for you, but you've probably actually ordered your life according to certain principles which you no longer consciously acknowledge. But if you start from the principle, well, nothing really matters, it's all relative, and you never actually even get to good and evil, then you haven't gone beyond them. You've just never even met them. You've never encountered them. And it's like that. Yeah. The thing is that you can reflect for like 5 minutes and realize that those things are in you. There is an adversary, but it's not out there in the world. Like you said, it's inside you, right?
Well, and insofar as you don't recognize it inside you, where are you going to locate it? And we certainly see evidence of that. That's out in the world, right? You project it. And so it's precisely the people that have not spent the time consciously suffering the fact that they are the villains that they need to defeat, that project that villain out in the world. And I was saying that I was teaching Oedipus the King, Oedipus Tyrannus, this last week, right? And so something interesting about that came out in seminar on Friday with the students is this: Oedipus believes himself to be a king, a hero at the beginning of the story, and acts like one, and has the social perception that he is a hero. But by the end, as disgraced as he is, he actually is a hero. Because what has he done? He's done exactly what he set out to do. He found the source of the problem. It happened to be him, though he had no idea it could be. And then he removes the source of the problem from the situation. He solves the plague, even though he caused it. And so what does that mean? It means that in order to become the hero that he had a bad conscience about thinking, but knowing that he wasn't, in order to become that hero, he had to recognize that he wasn't the hero that everybody believed him to be, but that he was actually the villain who was causing the very problem itself. That he had to realize that he was essentially the devil himself, that he had done the worst things possible, and that the plague that was afflicting his society was him. Its source was him. That the problem was not to be found in anybody else, and that the best thing he could do wasn't solving other people's problems represented by the Sphinx. Right? It's like you're a magician, you're magic if you can solve other people's problems. But no. It's not enough for him to solve the kingdom's problems or the world's problems. He has to solve his own problem. And what is his problem? Himself. Boom. That's the answer to man. That's the consciousness occurring in Westworld to the androids there. When you see yourself as the problem, as the villain who is bringing evil out in the world, boom, what do you now have? That's responsibility. You're conscious of the fact that you need to keep yourself from bringing the evil into the world, which you clearly perceive around you. And then you think, oh, that's a good thing to do. Don't let all the things I know I do, which are evil and mean and resentful and arrogant and deceitful at any level of analysis, either small or large, do fewer of those.
Right. And you are able to, like, you are the only person able to, but you are able to, it's very refreshing to realize that.
Yeah. I was noticing that the other day. I was getting angry about how I was pouring. I got into this stupid habit of I pour, I use the wrong hand, my left hand instead of my right hand, to pour water into my water bottle. And so I put my left hand across the nozzle sometimes so that I'll actually risk putting water all over my arm, when if I just used my right hand, it would be on the other side of the water bottle and I would get no water on my hand. And I kept getting annoyed by this and annoyed. And I was like, oh, you're getting annoyed because you're stupid. Because you need to make this change. You keep noticing that you're making an error, even though it's a small one. And instead of my first instinct, like my parents taught me, and this is something I've had to unlearn and am unlearning, was just get irritated and resentful of the world and the fact that physics don't work in this way, and ignore it because it's a small issue. And then just keep ignoring things. And that sets the pattern of ignoring small issues, right? Which that's the problem with doing that. But instead of just ignoring it because it was small, I changed it because it was small. And my life became a little bit better. And I respected myself more because I actually was conscious of a problem and I fixed the problem. And I set the pattern of fixing small problems. And it leads to me, sometimes when I start doing that in a day, just to generalize a little, then I start straightening up a little bit more. And it's like, if you start your day like that, sort of like how we were describing with, say, making your bed or doing some reading. I read, just like you said, you write. I read in order to start thinking, and you can attest to the fact that I'll often start sending text messages to you and a couple other friends, like long thoughts on thoughts. But it's like I'm revving up my engine for the day. I'm setting the pattern of being contemplative, of concentrating, of focusing on what's important and sharing that with others during the day.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's like looking people in the eye doesn't come naturally. So that's one that I have to just like consciously work on. Right. But it is something that over time, by people letting me know that that's like weird not to look at people, I figured it out. Oh, like this is something I just have to like actually make a little bit of effort to do, and then it has a good impact. Or like standing up straight, I've always hunched since I was young, and it's just something that I have to consciously work on, or else I fall back into bad habits.
And so that's the great thing about having imperfections, and why when Peterson says that he considers it a form of child abuse to tell children that they're perfect, I totally understand. And that's something I actually teach to my students. I'm like, if you were perfect, if you lived in Eden or on Ogygia from the Odyssey, where the food just grows and you experience no pain, and you have just a beautiful either Eve or Calypso with you, what would you do? And I'm like, think it through. Like 2 hours, that's pretty fun, right? 8 hours, 4 days, 2 weeks, a year. It starts to grow dark, right? And that's so interesting. And so, but if you have some imperfections, if the world's not so good, and maybe you're not even so good, you're more like the mud monster from Spirited Away than the dragon spirit he turns out to be. It's like, well, does that give you something to do that can bring hope and positive emotion into your life? Because when you work on your imperfections and the things you don't do well, you don't even need to focus on simply the physical imperfections, which certainly you have, unless you are Denzel Washington, who's used as the model for symmetry. It could just be any of your skills, right? How well do you type? How good is your handwriting? Do you know cursive? Are you as kind in your interactions as you could be? How good are you at, what the sports you play or the instrument you play? Do you play all the instruments? Can you play every sport? There are infinite things that you can improve at all the time. And in recognizing that rather than running from that, it fills your life with meaning. because then you're meeting all your then when you meet your own imperfections, rather than indulging in insecurity and running in fear from those fear or anxiety inducing moments, you can fill yourself with hope by embracing the challenge, by embracing that this is now part of your life. This is something you now recognize that you have a deficiency in. And in recognizing it gives you the responsibility to try and improve towards proficiency. In fact, when I first started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you know, it took me 3 weeks to submit somebody. I was at a very rough gym and I had to toughen up. Right. But in recognizing how bad I was at that, I would be running away from a dragon by just not attempting to get good. It's like, all these guys can beat me. If I just give up, then they will always been able to beat me. It was the same with CrossFit. I joined it. I felt too old. I had an injured knee. There were some young college kids. I was in grad school. I thought it was more for them, but they were all so much fitter than I was at that time that it was like, well, isn't that cowardly for me to just give up on this because I see that they're all so much better? And in fact, as you know, by the end of my career in grad school, you know, I was competing with all of them and competing with people on a grander level, which, you know, I would have never expected that. The big thing I took from that is when I first saw somebody do a ring muscle up, I thought that's impossible. I would rip my shoulder off. And then, you know, now I've done workouts where I've done 50 ring muscle ups. And I think that all these endeavors just go to show that, well, that's what a good life can be. You encounter something you didn't expect. It shows you to have weaknesses you didn't know. And in trying to fill those weaknesses, you become more conscious of who you are and what you're capable of. And you can end up doing things that you would have never imagined, because your imagination, to some extent, has to reflect the reality around you. And so without the conditions that you produce through making changes in your life, your imagination doesn't even have access to what you could possibly be.
Yeah. So within that, I think I'd like to kind of end by turning to the concentration question, though, because it's like, okay, there's like an infinite number of things you could work on, right, theoretically, but there's a limited time. You know, you don't have all the time in the world. Well, maybe in some sense, you know, if you think about like sort of getting into science fiction or you know, incredibly distant descendants or whatever, you do have all the time. But you personally, you know, can only work on so many things. So how do you sort of concentrate your time to the best of to make the best use of it? You know, how do you concentrate your attention on the best possible things that you want to focus on? It seems like there's sort of a few different answers to that, right? Like on the one hand, nothing really matters, so just do what you feel, right? Okay. It's the relative. And then on the other hand, the other extreme would be there's only one thing that really matters, right? And it's this tenet of faith or of ideology or of whatever someone, you know, told me it was, and now I believe that, and I'm just gonna do that one thing, and that, you know, can have positive or negative. And I think part of it comes from taking seriously the notion of the call, which is again one of those mysteries, right? That we believe in, but we don't like that we believe in it, so we pretend we don't believe in it, right? So there's not only the hero's call to adventure, which we all love, which is why we play video games where we're heroes, and then watch movies where we're heroes, and then watch TV shows where we're maybe heroes. Taking seriously the fact that perhaps what the call is how things call out for your attention. Just as Peterson says that the golden snitch is your interest, and just as St. Augustine said that the Bible, in the voice of a young boy, said, Labe tam biblion kai lege, you know, pick up, take and read.
Take and read, pick up the book and read it, you know. And it's like your interest is attracted to certain things, your attention is attracted to certain things. And I'm not necessarily saying, like Joseph Campbell, you have to follow your bliss, but I am more saying something like, you need to face the things in your life that cause you fear, because there's information in them. And that's why you fear them, because there's something unknown that is mixed with the negative unknown in whatever it is you fear. You only see the fact that it could potentially hurt you or is threatening, you don't see what it could teach you. But on the other hand, you also need to pursue the things you desire or hold in high esteem. You need, naturally, you will feel admiration for those people who embody virtues which you wish to embody yourself, which potentially you could embody. And so I would say you need to pay attention to yourself. Yeah. What are you neglecting consciously right now? Ask yourself, what am I neglecting? See if an answer or two pops up. Wait a moment. Surely it will. Also, what are you truly interested in, and what do you admire in others? Doesn't even have to be something they say. Doesn't even have to be something that you can put into words. You should try really hard, though, to put it into words.
Right? It's like once you have that call, there's like an element of willpower then too.
And so that's the concentrating. I see us as birds of prey, like falcons with sharp sight. We're circling around something, trying to find it. So if I say, what is it about that guy that makes me admire him? And we want to focus on that. Say it's Arnold Schwarzenegger. You're like, well, he's really strong. Well, he's really tall. Well, he's Austrian. Well, he has a big gap in his teeth. Well, he was a governor. Well, he's really successful. Well, he's a businessman. It's like, well, what is it about him? It's like, well, it seems like he can transform the reality around him in order to be a success. Maybe that's what I like about him, because it's not just that he was big and strong and had this and that and came from a different place. It's that he didn't have everything, but then he did. And how'd he do that? Or something like that. And that's how I consider the concentration. And that's why we should talk through these things, not only the things we fear. And we did that some last night, which was interesting. I was talking to you as if you were sort of a therapist, which was great, which is a good way to talk to another person if they're willing, I think. But that you're circling in, honing in on what it is that you are aiming at when you acknowledge and focus your attention, especially with another person who will then focus their attention, so you know it's real, on some issue which is either anxiety producing or something that has captured your imagination or attention. And that in paying attention to that in yourself, you can draw other people's attention in to help you, which also helps them to pay attention to themselves. And then you can help them in the same way, creating sort of a positive feedback loop, like I would say, have been doing in this conversation, where we are focusing more and more on the things we both uniquely care about by sharing them with each other and parsing them out together, sort of like we are putting together an abstract version of one of those 1,000-piece puzzles together. We are helping to map reality together by sharing what it is that we're both interested in and afraid of.
True.
Maybe we'll have to have a fear episode where we actually admit things that scared us in literature or in video games or in life, and see what information still exists there and whether we can parse it out and whether any of the listeners appreciate that.
Totally.
That does seem to be part of why we tell horror stories and ghost stories.
Zombies.
Something about zombies too. Yeah, I was talking about that with students. It's like, why do they eat your brain? Because they can't think and they don't want you to either. So no undead people who just take the opinions of the past and don't think for themselves. That's what a zombie is. And that's why in the 60s, zombies started coming about. And especially now, why we have so many zombie movies. And also I would say that's essentially what a vampire is too. It sucks out the blood of the living in order to continue to live, though it's long past due for its own death. And that's like an old, out-of-date idea. Or an ideology which takes the zombies, right? It is an opinion that takes the place of their own brains, which they use to eat the brains of others. Don't think that's evil. Just join. Well, not for us. Not for us. We're gonna hold up in our safe space in the mall or whatever.
Get my baseball bat out and my records and start hurling them at zombies. Yeah, there we go.
Yes,
cricket
very
bat,
good.
I guess it is cricket bat. Sorry.
Yeah, very Casey Jones. Very Casey Jones. And actually, that's funny. That makes me think of Ninja Turtles. I do own the book, and I was thinking about the phenomenon of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and how we should talk about that sometime. But I know you have some time constraints today, and I know that we're talking about using the day in the best possible way. And so does this seem like a good place to get off?
Yeah, this is a good pause button for now, and then I do want to talk Totoro next week if you get around to it. So
Yes, yes, yes. I'll be making sure to get around to it today. Yes, I know we've promised the listeners on side quests to continue going through Hayao Miyazaki and to go through Totoro. And even though Porco Rosso, which is not technically by Miyazaki but is put out by Studio Ghibli, is calling my name, I will finish Totoro in its proper times. Yeah, Totoro first, and then we can talk about it, and we'll be back on video for the side quests.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on. And again, everybody, please subscribe and like Bookwarm Games. Wes has 5 episodes on there now and a new conversation about the philosophy of video games with a friend of his. I'd say that's not everything they talk about, but that's something they get into, in the idea of open worlds and traveling between one quest and another, and how that relates to our lives, how when we finish one quest, when we accomplish a goal, we're sort of left in a dark wood, and what do we do next? And they consider that in the context of Zelda, and as well as talking about Earthbound, and well, it's very interesting stuff. So I hope people go over and like Bookworm Games, share your content and listen. It's all very interesting.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll see you later, Wes.
Okay. Have a good one.
You too.
The podcast you just heard was recorded with Anchor. If you want to make your own, download the Android or iOS app completely free from anchor.fm/podcast. That's anchor.fm/podcast.